You're fasting. You're skipping breakfast. You're pushing your first meal later and later. Maybe you're doing 16-8, maybe 18-6, maybe even one meal a day. And yet, when you look in the mirror, the one thing that still doesn't seem to change is the area you wanted to lose first: belly fat. That is the part nobody talks about honestly enough, because fasting can absolutely help with fat loss. But fasting by itself does not guarantee that your body will let go of abdominal fat quickly. In fact, many people are technically fasting correctly and still making a few hidden mistakes that keep their midsection from changing. And that is exactly what this video is about, because this is not just about eating less often. It is about understanding what your body is doing during the fasting window, what is happening when you break your fast. Belly fat, especially deep abdominal fat, is strongly connected to hormones, stress chemistry, insulin exposure, sleep quality, and inflammation. And by the end, you are going to understand why some people fast for weeks and see almost no visible change in their waistline, while others make a few strategic adjustments and suddenly everything begins to move in the right direction. The first thing to understand is that belly fat is not just stored calories. That is the biggest mistake. Most people treat belly fat like a simple math problem. They think if they stop eating for long enough, the body will just pull energy from the stomach area and melt it away. But the human body does not burn fat in such a simple, linear, emotionally satisfying way. Belly fat, especially deep abdominal fat, is strongly connected to hormones, stress chemistry, insulin exposure, sleep quality, and inflammation, and the way your body perceives safety and energy availability. That means you can be in a fasting routine and still be sending your body mixed signals that make it hold on to fat around the waist. And when people do not know this, they get frustrated. They blame themselves. They think they need to fast longer, eat less, punish themselves more, cut more carbs, do more cardio, and become more extreme. But sometimes the real problem is not that you need more discipline. Sometimes the problem is that your strategy is incomplete. One of the biggest reasons fasting does not reduce belly fat the way people expect is that fasting creates a window of opportunity, not a guarantee. That distinction changes everything. During fasting, insulin tends to fall, stored fuel becomes more accessible, and the body becomes more willing to mobilize fat. That is valuable. That is real. But mobilizing fat is not the same thing as permanently losing body fat, and it certainly is not the same as specifically flattening the abdomen. If your eating window is chaotic, if your meals are driving large glucose swings, if you are overeating after the fast, if your stress hormones stay elevated all day, or if your sleep is poor, the body can keep circling in a pattern where fasting feels productive, but the visual result stays disappointing. This is why so many people say, "I'm fasting, but my stomach still looks the same." What they are really saying is, "I created the fasting window, but I did not change the environment that makes belly fat easier to release." And this is where things get even more interesting. Belly fat is often more sensitive to cortisol than people realize. Cortisol is not the enemy. You need it. It helps you wake up, function, adapt, and respond to life. But when cortisol stays elevated too often, especially in people who already sleep poorly, rush through the day, overconsume caffeine, undereat protein, and live in a constant state of tension, the body becomes much more resistant to change around the midsection. So if your version of fasting looks like black coffee on an empty stomach, no real hydration, high stress, low sleep, intense hunger, and then a giant first meal eaten too fast, your body may not respond the way fasting influencers promised it would. You may still lose some weight. The scale may fluctuate, but the lower abdomen, the love handles, the stubborn waist measurement may barely move. And that is when people start believing fasting stopped working, when in reality, they never address the full hormonal picture. Another reason belly fat remains stubborn is that many fasters accidentally turn the eating window into a compensation window. They spend so much mental energy getting through the fast that when the eating window opens, they unconsciously reward themselves. They eat fast. They eat too much. They choose foods that are hyper-palatable and easy to overconsume. They tell themselves they earned it because they fasted for 16 or 18 hours. This is one of the most common hidden traps. Fasting can reduce calorie intake naturally, but only when the eating window is structured in a way that supports appetite regulation. If your first meal is low in protein, low in fiber, and built around refined carbs and fats that disappear in minutes, you can wipe out much of the metabolic advantage. Worse, you can trigger a cycle of cravings, energy crashes, and rebound eating later in the day. So, the problem is not always the fasting window. Sometimes the problem is what happens in the first 60 minutes after the fasting window ends. And then there is the expectation problem. Belly fat is usually the fat people want gone first, but often it is the fat the body is willing to give up last. That is frustrating, but it matters because unrealistic expectations ruin consistency. Many people begin fasting and expect visible stomach changes within days. When that does not happen, they assume the method is wrong. But the body often reduces bloating first, then water retention, then maybe some glycogen-associated weight, and only after that do clearer visual changes begin to show. On top of that, if you are gaining muscle, retaining water from stress, or dealing with inflammation, your waist may not reflect progress immediately even when internal improvements are happening. This is why people quit too soon. They measure fasting only by how flat their stomach looks in the mirror instead of understanding the biological sequence that often comes before visible abdominal change. So before we even talk about what to do next, here is the truth that changes the game. Fasting is not a magic trick for belly fat. It is a tool. A powerful one, yes, but still a tool, and tools only work when used in the right context. In the next part, we are going to break down the 3 biggest hidden mistakes people make while fasting that keep belly fat locked in place, even when they think they are doing everything right. Now that you understand that fasting creates an opportunity, not a guarantee, it's time to uncover the 3 biggest hidden mistakes that quietly block belly fat loss, even when your fasting routine looks perfect on the surface. These are the exact patterns that make people feel stuck, confused, and eventually discouraged. And the most important part is this: most people don't even realize they're making these mistakes. The first mistake is breaking the fast in a way that spikes insulin too aggressively and too quickly. After hours without food, your body becomes highly sensitive. That can be a good thing, but it can also work against you if you choose the wrong foods. Many people break their fast with something fast, convenient, and comforting: toast, pastries, sugary coffee drinks, processed snacks, or even large portions of refined carbohydrates. The problem is not just calories. The problem is the speed and intensity of the glucose response. When glucose rises rapidly, insulin rises with it. And when insulin rises sharply, fat burning is temporarily shut down. That means you spent hours creating a favorable fat-burning environment, only to interrupt it within minutes. But it goes deeper than that. When you break your fast with low-protein, low-fiber meals, you are not sending a strong satiety signal to your brain. You are essentially opening the door to more hunger later. This is why many people feel like they are always hungry despite fasting. It's not the fasting that's failing. It's the way the eating window begins. A strategic first meal changes everything. When your first meal is built around protein, fiber, and slower digesting nutrients, you stabilize glucose, control insulin, and extend the benefits of the fast into the eating window. Instead of creating a spike and crash cycle, you create a smooth transition. That is one of the most overlooked keys to reducing belly fat. The second mistake is something people rarely associate with fat loss: stress accumulation during fasting. On paper, fasting lowers insulin and supports fat mobilization. But in real life, your body is not responding to fasting in isolation. It is responding to your entire environment. If you are fasting while being sleep-deprived, overstimulated, constantly checking your phone, consuming high amounts of caffeine, rushing through your day, and dealing with chronic psychological stress, your body may shift into a more defensive state. And in that state, fat loss, especially around the abdomen, becomes less of a priority. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, plays a central role here. Elevated cortisol over time can increase cravings, disrupt sleep, alter glucose metabolism, and make the body more resistant to releasing stored fat. This is why some people fast longer and longer but see diminishing returns. They are increasing the duration of the fast, but they are also increasing the stress load on the body. and instead of accelerating results, they are creating friction. You might recognize this pattern: waking up already tired, pushing through the morning with coffee, ignoring hunger signals, feeling irritable, then overeating later. That is not a sign of effective fasting. That is a sign of imbalance. The third mistake is relying on fasting alone without enough daily movement, especially low-intensity movement like walking. This is where most people underestimate how powerful simple activity can be. When you are sedentary, even if you are fasting, your body has fewer opportunities to use glucose efficiently. Your muscles are not being stimulated to pull glucose out of the bloodstream as effectively, and over time, that can affect insulin sensitivity. On the other hand, when you integrate consistent movement, especially walking, your muscles become more active metabolically. They act like a sink for glucose, helping regulate blood sugar without requiring large insulin responses. This is critical for belly fat because abdominal fat is closely linked to insulin resistance. The more efficiently your body handles glucose, the easier it becomes to shift away from storing energy and toward using it. And here is the part most people miss: it does not require intense workouts. In fact, consistent low-intensity movement spread throughout the day can be more effective for metabolic health than a single short, intense session. Short walks after meals, brief movement breaks during the day, and gradually increasing your total step count can significantly amplify the effects of fasting. When you combine these three mistakes, poor fast-breaking meals, high stress, and low movement, you create a situation where fasting feels like effort without reward. You are doing something difficult, but the results do not reflect that effort, and that is where frustration builds. But once you correct these three areas, everything begins to align. Fasting becomes easier, hunger becomes more predictable, energy stabilizes, and most importantly, your body becomes more willing to release stubborn fat. Now, in the next part, we are going to take this even further. Because once these mistakes are removed, there are specific strategies you can stack on top of fasting to accelerate belly fat loss, without making your routine more extreme. These are the subtle adjustments that change how your body uses energy, manages glucose, and responds to food in a way most people never learn. Now that the biggest mistakes are clear, this is where everything starts to shift. Because once you remove what is blocking your progress, you can begin to add what actually accelerates it. And the difference here is subtle but powerful. You are not going to fast longer. You are not going to starve yourself. You are not going to rely on extreme diets. Instead, you are going to guide your body into a state where losing belly fat becomes easier, more consistent, and more predictable. The first strategy is what happens immediately after you eat, not just what you eat. This is one of the highest leverage habits you can build, and almost no one treats it as important. A short walk after your meal, 5 to 10 minutes, is enough to significantly change how your body handles glucose. When you walk after eating, your muscles begin to contract, and that contraction pulls glucose out of your bloodstream and into your muscle cells. This process does not rely heavily on insulin, which means you are lowering blood sugar in a more controlled and efficient way. And when blood sugar is managed more smoothly, insulin does not need to spike as aggressively. Why does this matter for belly fat? Because frequent insulin spikes make it harder for your body to access stored fat, especially in the abdominal area. When you consistently blunt those spikes, you create an environment where your body is more flexible. It can switch between using glucose and fat more efficiently. Over time, that metabolic flexibility is one of the key drivers of reducing stubborn fat. And the best part is how simple this is. You do not need a gym. You do not need equipment. You just need to move your body after you eat. The second strategy is something that sounds almost too simple to matter, but it has a profound effect when done consistently: how you distribute your steps throughout the day. Most people think movement only counts if it is structured as a workout. But from a metabolic perspective, your body responds very strongly to frequency. When you sit for long, uninterrupted periods, your metabolic activity slows down. Glucose handling becomes less efficient. Circulation decreases. And even if you fast, that sedentary pattern can limit how effectively your body uses stored energy. But when you break that pattern, even with short bursts of movement, you change the internal environment. Standing up, walking for a couple of minutes, taking a call while moving, walking during small daily tasks, these actions compound. Each small movement acts as a signal to your body. It says, energy is being used, muscles are active, fuel is needed. Over the course of the day, this creates a steady demand for energy that supports fat utilization. And when you combine this with fasting, you are not just creating a window where fat can be used, you are giving your body a reason to use it. The third strategy builds on something people already do every day, consuming coffee or tea. But here, timing and context matter. Caffeine has several effects that can enhance what fasting is already doing. It can increase alertness, reduce perceived effort, and slightly increase energy expenditure. But more importantly, it can support fat oxidation and improve how your body mobilizes energy. When used strategically, this can amplify the benefits of both fasting and movement. The key is not just drinking coffee or tea randomly throughout the day. It is aligning it with your activity. When you consume caffeine and then move your body within the next 30 to 90 minutes, you are working with your physiology. During this window, your body is more primed to use available energy. Your perceived effort is lower, which means you naturally move more. And that increase in movement, even if it feels small, adds up over time. It contributes to what is known as non-exercise activity, which can be one of the most underestimated factors in fat loss. But there is another layer to this. High-quality coffee and tea contain compounds called polyphenols. These compounds help reduce oxidative stress and support vascular function. In simple terms, they help your blood vessels function more efficiently. When you combine that with movement, you create a powerful synergy. Blood flow improves, nutrient delivery improves, and your body becomes more efficient at using and distributing energy. This is not about relying on caffeine as a crutch. It is about using something you already consume in a more intentional way. And then there is one more adjustment that changes how your body responds over time: how you think about intensity. Many people believe that if they are not pushing hard, they are not making progress. But when it comes to belly fat and metabolic health, consistency often beats intensity. Low to moderate movement performed regularly can create a more stable environment for fat loss than occasional high-intensity efforts followed by long periods of inactivity. This does not mean intensity has no place. It means it should be layered on top of a strong foundation, not used as a replacement for it. So now you have a different picture. Fasting is still part of the process, but it is no longer the only tool. It becomes one piece of a system. You fast to create the opportunity. You eat strategically to maintain stability. You move frequently to create demand. And you align simple habits like walking and caffeine to amplify the effect. This is how you move from effort without results to effort that actually translates into visible change. And in the final part, we are going to go even deeper into a few counterintuitive strategies that can further improve how your body handles glucose and energy. Strategies that sound backwards at first, but make complete sense once you understand how your body adapts over time. Now we arrive at the part that most people never hear, because it sounds counterintuitive at first. Up until now, you've been taught to think in simple terms: eat less, fast longer, avoid carbs, push harder. But when it comes to stubborn belly fat, especially in people who have already tried fasting, the next level is not about doing more of the same. It's about training your body to handle energy better, not just restricting it. The first concept is this: improving glucose tolerance can be just as important as reducing calorie intake. When your body becomes more efficient at handling glucose, it becomes easier to prevent excess storage and easier to access stored fat. This is where a small, strategic shift can make a big difference. Instead of fearing carbohydrates completely, There are moments where using a small amount of fast-acting carbohydrates during activity can actually train your muscles to become better at clearing glucose from your bloodstream. Here is how that works. When your muscles are active, they can take in glucose without relying heavily on insulin. That means you are using a pathway that improves metabolic flexibility. Over time, this can make your body more efficient at handling carbohydrates in general. So, in certain situations, like a longer walk or a more active day, a small amount of quick carbohydrate, something simple and controlled, can be used as a tool, not as a habit of overeating, but as a way to train your system. This is not about adding calories randomly. It is about improving how your body processes energy so that it does not default to storing it, especially around the abdomen. The second concept builds on protecting your internal environment so that all the work you are doing with fasting and movement is not being undone at the cellular level. Your body is constantly exposed to small forms of stress, oxidative stress, metabolic stress, and byproducts of normal energy production. Over time, these can interfere with how your cells respond to insulin and how efficiently your muscles use glucose. Supporting your body's ability to manage this internal stress can help maintain the pathways that make fat loss easier. This is where certain nutrients and compounds come into play. Your body already produces and uses compounds that support metabolic health, muscle function, and cellular efficiency. When these systems are supported, your muscles become more effective at taking in and using glucose, your energy production becomes more stable, and your body is less likely to accumulate excess energy in areas like the abdomen. The key here is not relying on supplements as shortcuts, but understanding that your internal environment matters. When your body is functioning efficiently at a cellular level, the visible results, like a reduction in belly fat, become easier to achieve. The third concept is one that brings everything together. Your body responds to patterns, not isolated actions. Fasting for 16 hours does not exist in isolation. It is part of a full 24-hour cycle. What you do before the fast, during the fast, and after the fast all interact. Your sleep affects your hunger. Your stress affects your insulin response. Your movement affects your glucose handling. Your food choices affect your energy levels. When these elements are aligned, your body receives a consistent message. And that message is what drives change. But when these elements are misaligned, when you fast but sleep poorly, when you restrict food but stay sedentary, when you eat quickly and reactively, when you rely on willpower instead of structure, you send mixed signals. And the body, by design, becomes conservative. It holds on. It slows down. It resists change, especially in areas like the belly where fat storage is more hormonally sensitive. So here is the shift that changes everything. Instead of asking, why is fasting not working for my belly fat? The better question becomes, is my entire daily pattern supporting fat loss, or is fasting trying to compensate for everything else? When you ask that question, you begin to see where the friction is. And once you remove that friction, fasting starts to feel different. It becomes easier. Hunger becomes more predictable. Energy becomes more stable. And slowly, the changes you were looking for begin to appear. This is not about perfection. It is about alignment. You do not need to fast longer than everyone else. You do not need extreme discipline. You need a system that works with your body instead of against it. Start with a consistent fasting window that you can sustain. Build your first meal around protein and fiber. Add simple movement throughout your day, especially after meals. Use tools like coffee or tea strategically, not excessively. Pay attention to your sleep and stress because they influence everything. And most importantly, give your body time to respond. Because the truth is, belly fat is not lost through one single action. It is lost through repeated signals that tell your body it is safe, it is stable, and it can finally let go. And when you understand that, fasting stops being frustrating and starts becoming one of the most powerful tools you can use.